everyone. My name is Jill Meyers, and we are here today for the IAWA event to conduct this panel on mentoring in the world of STEM or STEAM careers, whichever you prefer. Let me just introduce the panel real quick. We have Jonna Gerken, who is the Deputy Global Transition Manager for Pratt & Whitney Company in Hartford, Connecticut. Nicole Stott, who is an artist, astronaut, co-founder and director of the Space for Art Foundation, calling in here from St. Petersburg, Florida. And lastly, we have Kimberly Arcand, who is a visualization scientist and emerging tech lead at the Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My understanding is it's an organization sponsored by both Harvard University and the Smithsonian. And Kim there works on the NASA Chandra X-ray Observatory, which is a really awesome platform. So we're going to talk about all the different kinds of mentoring that you can do, whether you're in a company, in a nonprofit, whether you're on your own, whether you're a student. One of the key things we're going to talk about today is that there's so many different kinds of mentoring relationships. They're important. We all believe, the four of us, that mentoring is super important, regardless of your age, your grade level in school, your level in an organization. It is always so beneficial to have one or more mentors. So that's really what we're trying to scope today, and hopefully share some of our own experiences with you all and give you some ideas of maybe things you haven't thought of before. So to start it off, I'd like, Kim, if you could start, let's each talk about a mentor in our lives who really made a difference, and, to use an aeronautic term, change the trajectory of our careers in one way or another. So Kim, if you could start, because I know you have a really great story on that.
Yeah, so when I was an undergraduate at the University of Rhode Island, I was studying molecular biology. I was specializing in parasitology and infectious disease. But as I was approaching my junior year, I kind of realized, like, I don't actually want to be staring under a microscope for the rest of my life. And I was worried that I couldn't get out of it, or I couldn't transition to something else because I didn't have enough time left. So I wandered down to the computer science department, and just, I guess, the equivalent of a in-person cold call. And there was a professor there, Dr. Vicktor Favell, who just was very welcoming when I told him, like, my background, but that I really liked computers, but had like zero experience in coding or anything really, but that this is what I wanted to do. He was incredibly welcoming and completely took me under his wing, introduced me around to the other folks of the computer science department, ended up finding the perfect sort of internship, which was right at the intersection of parasitology, studying Lyme disease, and also computer science. And it was that sort of belief in me, that faith, that I could jump into a field that I had no experience in, and his ability to sort of guide and help shape how I saw not only the field, but also my place in the field, which was really important. That just set me on this trajectory that quite literally led me to kind of unlocking some of the keys of the universe, because I ended up from there having the right set of skills that was perfect for a job working for NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory, which is where I've been ever since, which is about 22 years. So I don't know that I recognized him as a mentor at the time, but he absolutely was someone who believed in me and supported me and listened to some of my ideas that were a bit out of the blue, and sort of directed me in the right ways to go, and also believed in me enough to give me like real hands-on experience. Like the job he gave me, teaching duties, I taught computer science 101, all of these things that I don't know, if I hadn't had that experience, I honestly don't think I'd be doing what I do today. So it was absolutely a key experience in my life.
That's really great. Anyone else want to add a story to this?
But I love your story, Kim, because I think it's kind of the surprise, right? That really, in the end, is surprising about how we end up doing what we're doing, and maybe in completely different ways than we had initially thought. And I just think back, and I think at these different stages, there were so many people along the way, everybody from, the teacher who taught some class that you didn't expect to have in high school, and invited me in, to do something like biology when I had, no desire to do that, and didn't end up doing anything with it. But she put me in this place that really challenged me. And I think that's what all of our mentors do in the end, whether we approach them or they approach us, they're challenging us in some way and maybe seeing something in us that we didn't, see in ourselves. And I'm thankful to have had parents who shared what they love with me and did a little bit of that challenging, all the way through to people that I ended up working with at NASA that, challenged me to pick up the pen and fill out an application, which was not something I would have done on my own, and definitely changed the path for me.
How about you, Jonna?
Yeah, I do have something to add. I just wasn't as quick as Nicole on the button. So I don't know if it's necessarily directly mentor related, but just it's an experience that changed my trajectory a little. When I was in high school, I was convinced I was going to be an architect. That was what I was going to do. My uncle was an architect. I loved what he did, and it seems like such a great way to blend my love of math and science with that little bit of creativity and vision. So I did a summer program in architecture, and I was terrible. I really just didn't get it. All these other students were very much I don't want to say more creative, because that's probably not the right word, but could visualize and express what they were thinking way better than I could. Very much more out of the box thinkers, where all of my designs were very much structural and practical and user friendly. So those were the things I was thinking of, not how to make these elaborate buildings with different shapes. So I've told this story before, and I wish I could remember who actually planted the seed of engineering, because I would love to thank the person who said, well, maybe not architecture, but maybe engineering. Yeah. So that person, thank you, whoever you are, said maybe engineering would be a better place for you. And so it really has been much better from a, just every standpoint that I've, the things I've learned, the experiences that I've had, the people I've met, that really has been the right choice.
That's really great. I know something I'd like to touch on is the fact that when I was younger, I really didn't have any mentors, at least how we kind of define them today. And for me, it was really more of a role model kind of figure, in the distance. The first time I remember being, enamored enough with someone to go, wow, I wonder if I could do that or be that, actually was an astronaut named Judith Resnick, who, sadly was on the Challenger when that accident happened. But I was, we were similar ages at the time. I think she was a little older, but I really aligned with her because we were both young, single Jewish engineers, which isn't all that common, that combination. And, when I read about her first joining NASA and read her background, and I just thought, wow, if someone like her, can get to where she is. And of course, I was already enamored with things that fly anyway. So for me, it was really someone that I saw, a quote famous person who had enough similarities to me and had achieved something really miraculous that I was already kind of on a path into aerospace anyway. So I didn't have a real mentor for a very long time. And for me, it was more, reading about people or seeing someone successful in something that just really, hit me either in my heart or just really seemed like something that I could also seek after. So it's very interesting. And I know one of the many reasons I do a lot of mentoring is because for me, I feel like it was a real gap in my career to not have good mentors in the first X number of years, and X is a big number. So, I feel like I don't begrudge anything in my career. It's been pretty good, but I really feel like it would have gone in a different direction had I had someone sit down and say, Jill, if you really want to achieve XYZ. Here's paths to get there. And I really never had anyone lay out a path for me. I've always been sort of on my own to do that, and it's not fun. So, you know, I really try to give back to the next generation because of things that I really felt were lacking in my own life. So it's just interesting how that happens. So, you know, mentoring, and the four of us have talked about this before. You know, one of the things I love about mentoring is that it really does not have to be one specific type of relationship or agreement. I know when I was in the corporate world and I would ask people to be mentors of, you know, maybe a younger engineer who worked for me, the response was usually, oh, I don't have time. I can't meet with someone monthly or weekly or whatever. I just don't have time. That was always the first thing out of people's mouths. And I know we've talked before, and I'd like us all to sort of share stories about how mentoring can take such different looks and feels regarding not just, you know, frequency of how often a mentor and a mentee meets, but really what it looks like. And I'll just start off with a quick story. Is that one time I actually, and Nicole and I have talked about this, and she has a great story too, this accidental mentoring concept, where I had a great experience where I was doing a public speaking event at my university just last year, and I did a presentation to about 30 young women who were in the aerospace engineering department. It's at the University of Texas at Austin. And I did a presentation just on women in aviation in general and really awesome things going on in the aerospace world, new technologies they can get into as they're graduating. And there were maybe 30 young women in the room, and we were there for a very long time. And then as I was leaving, one of them wanted to walk me to my rental car. And we were on the way walking, and she looked at me and she stopped on the sidewalk and she said, you know, Jill, I've lived my whole life in fear, and now that I've met you and talked to you, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like I have this new sense of bravery to move forward. And I was, you know, number one, in tears, number two, completely blown away by it. And that was really like a mini mentoring thing that I never would have labeled as that, you know. So I know, Nicole, you have another, you know, accidental mentoring concept, and I'd like each of you to just to talk about, you know, relationships you've had being either a mentor or a mentee that really don't fit the normal box of what people think is a routine mentoring relationship.
Yeah, well, I love, you know, Jill, I love what you were saying as you led into this too, kind of as a follow-up to the first discussion, is that, you know, I think there's a real significance in just being present, right? Even if somebody doesn't approach you after the speech that you make or the interaction that you're having with them, even if they don't walk you to your car, I've found it's really interesting to hear kind of after the fact, or even, you know, from somebody else, oh, so-and-so really was impacted by what you had to say. And in a lot of ways, I don't even think it's what we have to say, you know. I think that it's just us being there, making ourselves present for young women especially. I think that young women are really see it, be it, right? You know, for some reason we need to, you know, visualize that somebody else is doing, has already done, or is about to do, I guess, the kinds of things that we might think at that point are impossible or too challenging, or, oh, no way somebody would pick me to do that. So I really am happy that you brought that up. And I think it feeds right into this idea of accidental mentoring, is that I don't think you have to be assigned to somebody. I know in my own life, I think back now, and I could go to a couple of the people who I consider to be mentors in kind of hindsight, and they'd look at me like, are you kidding me? I never really signed up to mentor you or anything. But their influence, I think their just willingness to share what they loved, to express it, to encourage me was, as far as I'm concerned, that's mentoring. And And then I've also been very lucky, I think, to be put in positions where, kind of like the person that gets asked, oh, we have this program and we'd like you to mentor this person. And you're thinking, like you said, oh, I don't have time to do that. You want me to talk to them once a month, gosh, how could I do that? And you don't have any clue who this person is. And somehow you end up making this really beautiful connection with them on one level or another. And in some ways it might be like, like the job you mentioned, Jonna, where it's not what I want. I mean, they learn from you what they don't and aren't interested in too. And I think that's a really valuable thing as well. So I'll be quiet, but I think there's so many ways for us to just be present, not just standing in front of a room talking to people, but just through the interactions that we can have, even in surprising ways.
I think to your point, Nicole, just today I was on a call with someone, a colleague who I absolutely adore. And over the course of the conversation, which actually was about mentorship, she called me her mentor. And I would never have described myself as that. This is just a colleague to me who I adore, but like I had never thought of that relationship. And I think it's kind of what you've both said, like we are just present for each other. Mm-hmm. When we're at events, we make time for each other. When we're in a meeting, one or the other seem like they're perhaps a little confused on something, we'll make the time to talk after, or just send an email out of the blue if we're not working together on a project for a while. So hearing that from her was for one, I was kind of like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm not doing a good job of a mentor if I don't even know it. But it really is, I think, about that idea of just being present. And I had a student who worked for me a couple years back who, again, I didn't think I was a mentor for her, but in a very public forum that I had asked her to speak in on a topic of women in computer science, she made this comment that she had planned to leave computer science because as a woman of color, she hadn't felt welcome at a very liberal university in a field that doesn't have the best reputation. But that working on my project had let her see that there was a place for her. And honestly, just hearing that message in a room full of people that I respected, like almost brought me to tears. But it really is this idea that, being just there for each other and just the smallest encouragements that you might not know you're doing can make all the difference to someone. So it's not necessarily the big things you have to do. Sometimes it's just the smallest things that you're helping people along and you're not even knowing it.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that too, Kim, because I was recently asked in an interview what I think the number one quality is of a good manager and a good leader. And of course, they're not the same, but we won't get into that. And the first thing that came out of my mouth, and the interviewer was so floored, was the word being compassionate. And because I've always been told that especially as a manager in an organization, that my caring about the people that worked for me was sort of unique and novel. Go figure. But as far as mentoring, I have found too that there's a few young women that I consider myself a mentor for, but to me they're just friends. But just what you were saying, Kim, is what I find that they most value from me as a mentor is just the ability to pick up the phone and call me when they are really in crisis. I have two young women I helped get into the Navy. They're both in flight school, and they're about a year apart in flight school. And even though that's not something I've experienced personally, they know that if they really need advice, they can just text me, as one just did the other day. She just texted me and was like, I really need your advice. Like, can I call you in the next 10 minutes? And luckily I was available. And those little moments just mean, for me, it was a 10-minute phone call. For her, it was, potentially life-changing. So this whole concept that mentoring can just be something small and even one time, I think is really important for people to know. Now, granted, there are many people out there who see value in a, quote, more formal mentor relationship, like at a company, like at the company that you work for, John, at Pratt & Whitney. I'm sure there's more, regimented mentoring relationships built up. What I'd love you to talk about is something that we talked about previously, which is a lot of people, especially in the corporate world, believe that a mentor needs to be a certain number of levels above them. Like, there's these rules in people's heads about, if you're going to find a mentor at a company like Pratt & Whitney, you have to go look for this exact kind of person. So I know you have a very different take on that. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I also want to lead into that with, I think the thing that's changed the most about mentoring over the last 20 whatever odd years that I've been working is the technology that now allows it to happen in so many different ways. Where it used to be you had to sit face to face with somebody and have that private discussion, that now you can have in myriad ways, whether it's on the phone, on a cell phone, on text, online, in person. That, I think, has broadened the definition of mentoring and allowed all these different types of mentoring to happen that, really before it had to be either face to face or on a landline, because that's all you had. So what that has allowed is, actually, I'm in a group on Facebook, and many of the folks participating may not really even know that, that's a thing anymore, but yeah, it's still a thing. We have a Facebook group where it's all working moms. It's all, engineering working moms. So we're all engineers or STEM careers, all moms of some sort. And working of some sort, full-time, part-time, all over. And so that's what we have in common. And the amount of what most people call peer-to-peer mentoring is amazing, because nobody cares who's what level, what grade, where they are in their organization. Nobody cares how much experience they have. Some of the women went back to school later. Some are brand new out of school. Some had their kids really young, all over the place. So that doesn't matter, because everyone brings those different perspectives to the conversation, and anything goes. There's topics work-related, definitely non-work-related topics, and everything in between. And I think at this point in my career, I'm getting the most value out of that, because we're all similar in a lot of ways, but have the different perspectives to share, versus sitting in a room with, or on a phone call with someone 1 or 2 levels higher than you, and it always just seems like it's only career directed, right? It's only, how do I get to the next step? Whereas this peer-to-peer is really for dealing with so many things, whether it's, I'm a new manager, what do I have to do? Or I don't like my manager, or how do we talk about this topic that, just came up? Or how are we dealing with what's going on in the world? How do I bring up those conversations? My kids need to be potty trained, what do I do? So there's a whole variety of topics, and it really is amazing the honesty and the depth and the non-judgmentalness of it. Nobody is judgmental. It's, if you don't have anything to say, you don't say anything. If you have anything nice to say, you don't say it. But if you have a differing opinion, it's fine. Everyone shares, there's a lot of threads that'll start off with one opinion, and somebody will say, but wait. And then you have a whole bunch of conversation after it, and it's wonderful. And it's really probably the highlight of, I guess, that kind of mentoring network that I have right now.
That's really great. And that's a really good, I love that you brought up the Facebook group, because I was very anti-Facebook. Well, I'm still anti-Facebook for a lot of reasons, but I was very anti-Facebook for anything professional for a long time. But there's a couple Facebook groups I'm in that really are helpful, and I'm really glad you brought that up. And that's another thing I'd love us to talk about, is there's so many different places to look for a mentor these days, or if you're looking for someone to mentor. So, Jonna, with you being a prior president of the Society of Women Engineers, an amazing organization, let's talk about some of the different organizations and different networking opportunities there are for people, again, regardless of whether they're in college or in the workplace, where people can really go to connect with others, in a mentoring relationship, specifically, obviously, since that's our topic. So do you want to start off with just talking about SWE a little bit, and how that enabled some mentoring relationships, and then maybe the others can chime in with different organizations or different networking methods that they've experienced, as far as mentoring goes?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about SWE. I can talk about SWE forever. But Yeah, so the Society of Women Engineers has been around, actually, this is our 70th anniversary this year. So just last week was our Founders Day. So we're celebrating 70 years. We're an international organization, a global organization of over 40,000 supporters of women in engineering. And I say supporters because it's not all women. There are plenty of men involved. And corporations and other, you know, groups that we work with. So in itself, it is a built-in network. So you can find just about any type of engineer in the organization, different career stages and, you know, different backgrounds. So within this big network, we actually have a bunch of smaller networks as well. We have affinity groups for folks who have other things in common. Right now, they're mostly around ethnic type of backgrounds or race and ethnicity, really. We're just starting to put in affinity groups for other areas, small business and entrepreneurs, you know, things like that. And we're expanding those all the time. So that has been a wonderful way to network. That was actually my first network out of college. I joined in college, so I had my collegiate section, but then when I graduated, I jumped right into my local section in Hartford, Connecticut, as a way to meet people because I knew nobody. I was coming to a new state, to a new job, knew nobody, didn't even know really where to live. So use them as a way to not only get those resources, but to just kind of get involved and understand what it was going to be like, not only to live here, but to work here and to, you know, and to grow. So I still have a lot of those women are still my friends now, many, many years later. We've been through a lot together, lots of babies and weddings, and unfortunately, sometimes other things as well, not so nice. So that's been wonderful. And then SWE itself does partner with many of the other diversity organizations, NSB, SHIP, and ACES primarily, and working on some other partnerships as well, so that we can broaden our reach as well, because we know women in engineering, but we don't know all women in engineering. We don't know all the different types of women, and we know that we need to work on it and work on other ways to improve the diversity of women in engineering. So we work very hard on that as well.
So Kim, what are your networking experiences related to mentoring?
So I found, for the most part, similar to Jonna, like the professional societies have always been really helpful. So whether it's the American Astronomical Society or Women in Technology or Women in 3D Printing, like those type of societies and organizations have always been very helpful. For some of the more like formal mentoring that I've done, I've definitely found the various universities I've attended have been great. They all have fantastic mentoring programs that I participate in some way. Million Women Mentors is another great organization to get involved with. And also I do find on social media, though I have a love-hate relationship with social media, for peer-to-peer mentoring, which we've already talked about, has been like very helpful. I find particularly on Instagram and Twitter, that type of peer-to-peer mentoring can be great, especially if you follow certain hashtags and then start sort of following certain people. It's a really great way to start getting to know other people in your field or related fields. Nicole,
do you want to chime in?
Sure. I think I will echo what all of you have said about the professional organizations too. And I just, you know, we all end up in our own little worlds too, where different organizations open up. I've recently gotten very active, like the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, and also a group called Brooke Owens Fellowship. And in both of those cases, what's most attractive to me about them, just like when I was on the board of trustees at my university, the thing that was most attractive to me about doing that was the opportunity to engage with the students that are benefiting from those programs. And that's probably the most, you know, kind of formal relationships I have. What I like too, though, is that I think we can look at, you know, there was a passion and inspiration or whatever that drove us to want to study something, right? But underlying that are like personal interests that we have too, that, you know, for me, it started out as flying. That was just something that I thought was fun, but I wanted to develop that understanding, you know, art, these kinds of different hobbies even that we have that opens up the opportunity to engage with people that love those same kinds of things too. And it's amazing kind of what you can get from them that then can have a really positive influence on your career trajectory as well, or opening up new ideas for you. I especially love, just going a little bit back to the peer-to-peer thing, is this idea of, we start out as a mentor for somebody, right? And then at some point down the road, you look and that person is your peer. And you're talking to them, you're communicating with them on a level that's completely different. And you see a little bit of reflection of what, you shared with them as a mentor coming through in some of it, but their own ideas as well. I just love that. And then later where they kind of transcend, and there's this like back and forth mentorship thing going on. And I just love seeing that. And then watching them kind of reach out and, find their way to lift other people up and encourage through what they've learned. But I think it all in the end comes down to like really leveraging what you love to share the best you can.
I love that concept. That's great. Something that a couple of you have said that just sort of struck me is, I think we probably all have a love-hate with social media, but one of the benefits that I have found for it is when I do connect with someone and can, help them, or they can help me in any kind of a little mentoring moment, the ability to follow up with them by watching them on social media is really huge. Because I remember back in the day, like when I was at Boeing many years ago, I would mentor someone and then they would transfer to another location or something, and then you don't ever know how they're doing. And, following up was always really a challenge. Now there's a couple of people I mentor where I know everything they're doing because of social media, which is good and bad, right? It's overload for a few, but it's an amazing way to really see the results of your mentoring when you can just, they do a LinkedIn post about something amazing they've done, or on Twitter or whatever. So I guess, I've tried to focus on the benefits of social media, and try not to hate it so much. But I think that's something I've recently really appreciated, because follow-up is always so difficult. I mean, even scholarships, which you mentioned, Nicole, I've been on a couple scholarship committees, and you give someone a scholarship and then you just send them off, and you really don't know always how they benefited from that, how they even used it at times. So it's nice to be able to really sort of keep an eye on people, in a positive way, and really watch their careers take off. And, especially if you can say that you were any part of that, it's really quite rewarding, right? So one question I do have for you guys: how many of you are still involved with the university where you obtained your degree, as far as reach back? I know I mentioned I was at UT Austin last year, and honestly, it was the first time I'd been there in over 30 years. They saw me post something on LinkedIn, and it triggered someone's brain, and they called me and asked me to come and speak to the engineering college. But I had not been back in 30 years, even though I pay the alumni dues and all that. So can you guys talk a little bit about, going back and talking to folks at where you went to school, or one or more of the places y'all went to school, and how do you, I'm more interested in how you guys benefit from that. It's very clear how the people you're talking to benefit, but what do you guys get out of going back to your alma mater and meeting with folks there? You want to start, Nicole? You waved your hand first, I think.
Sure, I'm sorry. Yeah, I muted because my dogs were about to bark. Yeah, you know what? I think that it's like one of the greatest gifts to be able to go back there and see other students who are just starting out, to see how the university has developed itself, especially like in my case, I really am thankful, for having the opportunity to go to the school that I went to, actually all of them. And so to be able to go back and see other students kind of starting to live that and benefit from it and to grow from it is really important to me. And also, you get invited back to speak or to engage with some things. I really found my role on the Board of Trustees at Embry-Riddle is where I was on the Board of Trustees for about 5 years. And when they first asked me to join, I was kind of like, wow, you know, what am I going to do on this Board of Trustees? I looked around at the group of people who, you know, made the board, the other members. I'm like, all of these people have, and I'll just say it, have financially done really, really well in their fields, right? So in addition to, you know, them having some relationship with the university or wanting to give back to the university in some way, they could financially do that. And there was kind of this expectation of that, right? I'm like civil servant. I'm not in that position, right? So I went into it a little timid at first, thinking, oh, I don't matter as much because I can't fork over cash, right? And I discovered that, you know, first of all, what I wanted to do was engage with students, was to have another opportunity to see how the university was developing on their behalf and to perhaps have an influence on that, but also to find my way into the little different niches of student life that was going on. And I was really, really able to do that through that forum. And I grew as part of that too. I realized as well that, you know, it isn't all about having, you know, financial resources. There really is a time talent thing that we should all appreciate from ourselves, regardless of, you know, what economic kind of situation we're in. But that was really rewarding for me to discover that and to know that the students were, you know, looking forward to my engagement with them as well.
That's great.
I love that you said that, Nicole, because as a government employee, I know exactly what you mean.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. That expectation of the financial part is interesting. And also, I guess, similarly, I think, back to Jill's question too a bit, like I always feel so engaged and energized when I go back to any school that I've participated at in some way. It's amazing to me what talking to someone who's currently in their academic path can do to energize me, to make me feel more connected to my work, to make me feel more enthusiastic and just engaged with what it is I do. So I actually feel like I've kind of come to rely on that. Like, you know, if I'm feeling a bit blue in my daily work, it's like, all right, I need to get a talk set up or something so I can engage with students again, because it's that powerful for me. I really feel like it's a sort of necessary part of how I work, being able to interact with people that are on their current path and just see what they're looking at, what they're thinking about. It always makes me think differently about what I'm doing and how I'm thinking and how I'm interacting and all that. So I think being able to go back and talk with students is a true gift.
That's great. How about you, Jonna? Thank you both.
I agree totally. I don't know that I've done a lot with my alma mater specifically, just because the timing hasn't worked out. But one of the benefits of having been SWE president was being invited to a lot of other schools' events to do those type of outreach activities. And I had said yes as much as I possibly could. To Kim and Nicole's point, right? Being able to talk to the students, hear their questions. You know, there's a lot of kind of standard questions that they want to know about you and your career and all that. But just some of the other things that they come out, like, what do you see changing in industry? Or, you know, how can I have an impact on the world? You know, really great questions that I don't think I would have ever asked somebody when I was in their shoes. So their ability to have these really great, thoughtful questions to discuss. And I'll be honest, I don't always have a great answer, and I'll tell them that if I don't, and we'll discuss it amongst ourselves, you know, or in a group. And that really has probably been, the most impactful thing that I could do, not only just to share my stories, but to listen to their questions and give them, you know, some honest answers. And it's not always, you know, about getting a job. Some of it's, you know, way beyond that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was really blown away by the questions I was asked at UT, and definitely couldn't answer some of them. And one of the coolest things is I was there for 3 days or 2 days and did 3 keynotes. And one of the keynotes that was my largest audience right in the front row was one of my favorite professors. No, I graduated 32 years ago, and they called him on retirement and told him I was there, and he was in the front row, and that was like ridiculously crazy time for me. But yeah, I don't know if they're all smarter than we are, ladies, but there's something about this generation of college kids now that is really mind-blowing. They're going to be, I wish I could follow all of them through their careers. You know, they're just such an exciting crowd. So I think the last thing we're going to talk about, I'm looking at the clock, is that I think as mentors and just as people who've been around a while, I'd like us each to talk about, you know, the one or two really key messages that you relay to people that you come across, you know, again, whether it's the accidental mentoring or just the casual chat or in a formal mentoring relationship. I know for me, I think one of my key messages that I try to impart to young people, there's really two. One is, and it's a famous quote from Sally Ride, who said, "You can't be what you can't see." And we've all talked about that a little bit today, but you know, if you go to an elementary school or a middle school and, you know, you get an airline pilot in uniform or an astronaut or, you know, any firefighter, you know, anyone who's especially in uniform, it just tends to have more bang. But, you know, if little kids can look up and see women in traditionally male fields or the other way around, male nurses, for example, seeing someone in that role is so important. So one of my first messages to people is always, you know, if you have any thought at all of any career that at all intrigues you, go find someone doing it. And especially if it's a male dominated field, you know, find a woman doing it, whatever it is. And on the flip side, I always really encourage people to get out there in public more, and so they can be that role model and be that person that some 6-year-old sees. You know, Nicole Malachowski was the first female Air Force Thunderbird pilot. It's a friend of mine. And she always, you know, tells her story about she was 6 years old she was 5 or 6 at an air show, and a fighter jet went over, and she looked at her parents and said, you know, I want to do that. And women weren't even remotely allowed at the time. And their response was, "You're going to make a great fighter pilot someday, honey. Let's figure it out." And, you know, but if she had been able to see a female doing that, it would have been even more impactful. And the other message that I have to people, I'm going to be quoting others this whole time, but I heard a presentation a couple years ago from Deborah Lee James, who at the time was the Secretary of the Air Force. And she talked about her career early on being kind of like you said, Jonna, being in a completely different direction. She wanted to go somewhere completely different. She was dedicated. She had planned it. She had worked her tail off on achieving what she thought was the way to get in, and she was declined multiple times. And someone said to her, "Hey, there's this Air Force civilian job over here." And she's like, "Really?" And, you know, then she was Secretary of the Air Force, and it was a path she never thought she'd be on. But during her presentation, she used the phrase, she said, "Your career should zigzag. You know, don't think that you need to have a 30-year plan and stay on it, and that it's bad if you jump off that path. I mean, you can stay on that path." But I've mentored so many young people who for things did not go well, and they thought their life was over. They were devastated. And, you know, talking to young people about something better really probably will come along for you, and that your career can and maybe should zigzag is another like really powerful message that I like to share with folks. So Nicole, I believe you have something on your desk maybe that is a message that you've talked to us before about sharing, but what's some of your key messages to folks that you come across?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple that seem to, I mean, they really resonated with me, which is why I think I'm comfortable sharing them. You know, people that, you know, understand the honesty in the presentation there. You know, I mean, just like you had these relationships with how you know, came across those thoughts. I will say right off the bat, though, they are smarter than we are. I don't know if it's smarter, but they have had experiences like I could not imagine having in that amount of lifetime. And I'll just tell you, you know, having sat on the selection committee for one of the recent astronaut selections. So Megan MacArthur and I, Megan MacArthur Bankin, wife of the, you know, Bob, who just flew to space the other day, she and I are sitting next to each other, and we got halfway through a day of interviews, and somehow we just both like looked at each other and were like, I don't think we'd select ourselves anymore. You know, just the experiences that these young people had had in their 20-something years or 30 years that I don't know how they've done it. I don't know how. Anyway, so my one thing that I will show you here is, I don't know if you can see it or not. It's this little astronaut guy holding the words, "Here's how we can, not why we can't." And that for me has been so huge. And it's something that I came across in the first week of my job with NASA at the Kennedy Space Center, working on the space shuttle program. And it was from a person who I just saw this weekend, Mr. Jay Honeycutt, who was absolutely, I mean, the mentor of mentors for me. He is the man, one of them, who can, you know, encourage me to pick up the pen and fill out the application and do the thing I had total control of, right? But his whole philosophy and what he presented to us as young engineers when we started out at Kennedy was the way we go to space, the way we as human beings do really, really complex things is with this philosophy, not the other. It's how can we do this? What are the solutions? Not listing all the things that are going to keep us from doing something. So I mean, it works with everyone too. And it really does end up having results. The other thing I really love, I think it follows along with you, Jill, too, is this idea that the rocket ship doesn't care if you're a boy or girl. Absolutely doesn't care. Pretty much, you know, there's only a few things where that matters in the end, really. And otherwise, we as human beings have somehow, you know, tainted or influenced in a way that causes people to believe that they might not be able to do something. And I think when I started thinking that way, like, oh my gosh, you know, the computer, the lawnmower, you know, whatever it is, my interaction with other people, it's not about whether I'm a boy or girl. It's about me doing the best I can, being passionate and curious about something, and really, really knowing in my heart that I want to do it. So, yeah, I think those would be the two things as I ramble on.
That's great. That's great. Jonna, how about you?
I'd say there's two things that I try to kind of both live by and impart to all other folks. Is one that I got from somebody else, right? One of my former bosses, you know, maybe mentor in a way, said to me, leave a legacy with whatever you're doing. Doesn't have to be a game changer, you know, world peace solver, but just leave some sort of legacy in whatever you're doing, whether it's at work, improving some process or product, or in your life, you know, being a good friend to somebody. You know, if you can think back and say, you know, I did make some sort of change, you know, that's a great way to go about life. And the other is to always assume positive intent, because I think people get wrapped up in a lot of drama and, you know, turmoil in daily life. Very few people do it with evil intent, right? Most people are doing things because they think it's the right thing to do. So just assume there's positive intent, and if you have to ask some questions to clarify, do so. But don't go in, you know, into a conversation or discussion with somebody, you know, assuming anything else, because that's really not going to help get to the root cause of the problem or solve the issue. If you do, it's just going to make things more fractious.
I love those. Thank you.
And I
Kimberly.
guess I get to wrap it up, but so I would say my two thoughts are very similar to yours, Jill. So one is it's okay to fail. I think that can be very hard for people sometimes, especially women. And I failed genetics as an undergrad and thought it was the end of the world. I'm too stupid to do science. If I can't get through this class, how am I going to do this for a career, right? But it was such a teachable moment for myself because I had to learn how to be more aggressive in a class if I was falling behind. I had to learn how to partition my time better. Like, it really was an example that showed me that failure is just a really fast way to learn something, right? It's a part of the journey and we can't avoid it. The other, I think, also goes back to what you said, Jill, about the zigzagging and the fact that I think society today expects 10-year-olds to know exactly what they want to be when they grow up, right? I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to go to med school and then I'm going to be a doctor for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm 44 and I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And that is totally fine, right? It's all about engaging your whole brain. It's about being multi-passionate. It's having interests that are all over the map, whether you think it will benefit your career or not. I mean, I find in myself and among the people that I choose to work with and hire even, that people who have zigzagged have so much to give. And that idea of like the multi-passionate background can be such a benefit because you can bring such a diversity of thought and experience to a project that can be incredibly valuable. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of kind of bringing your whole self, your creative self, whatever self you have, and not worrying about what you're going to be when you grow up, or how you're going to do this one specific thing. And that's definitely been helpful for me in the course of my career.
That's really great. I love what all of you have said. So in wrapping it up, did we miss anything we were supposed to talk about, or that we did in our little preparation? Is there anything else that any of you want to add as we close this out? No? All shaking heads. Okay, well, I just want to thank you all. You're all incredibly amazing women. I am so honored that you agreed to be on this panel and support this activity from IAWA, and hopefully the audience will enjoy it. I think it's been great. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jill. Thanks.